right.
Out there. Okay. You might find it easier if you put it onto speaker screen or screen speak, whatever it's called, rather than gallery view. So you can see these pictures. You should be seeing a picture now of me outside Florin Court. So welcome to Adventures in Location Detecting, a light-hearted look at the perils of location detecting, especially if you're doing it with me. Before we start, I would like to apologise, in particular to any overseas listeners, if I sound like some simple old English country boy. This is because I am a simple old English country boy. Having been for many years intrigued by the filming locations used in screened period dramas, and in particular Agatha Christie adaptations, I have dragged my poor, long-suffering wife up and down the highways, byways, back roads and private drives of England in order to recreate some of the scenes as seen on TV. Having posted the results, it would seem with some appreciation, across several Christie-themed social media groups, I started the Agatha Christie Locations Facebook group in April 2019. I must assume my fascination is shared, as the group has grown considerably since then. Detecting the whereabouts of the locations sometimes requires a little ingenuity, and gaining access to them sometimes requires a little barefaced cheek, starting with the BBC's Joan Hickson Miss Marples. Having discovered the identity of Gossington Hall from the 1984's Body in the Library as Wherwell Priory in Hampshire, we found access to it a little restricted. Luckily, I found out that, like many of England's grand old houses, it's sometimes used for weddings. So if challenged, we had concocted a story about scouting possible venues for our daughter's upcoming society wedding. Expense no object. Thankfully, we were not stopped, as my clapped out old Ford Focus may have been a bit of a giveaway. And although our Jane and Dolly charade was seen by no one, our antics in the Royal Bath Hotel in Bournemouth, which was used for the interiors of the Majestic, were enough to get us a free coffee. We were pleasantly surprised to find that the Limpston of 1985's Moving Finger relatively on our doorstep at Hoxton Village on Norfolk-Suffolk border, where some of the older locals still remembered vividly the filming that had happened 30 years previously. There's not much happens in a quiet country village, eh, Miss Marple? Trespassing isn't a word I like to use or hear, but I did have to tread carefully through the grounds of Elm House in Hoxton to get close-up views of the Firs, as owned by Miss Barton and lived in by Mr. and Miss Burton. And would you believe it? They've still got the same wallpaper. Fortunately, again, no one at home, but I did get shouted at in true "get off my land" fashion by the presumed owner of Monk's Hall, which was used as the Symington residence in the neighbouring village of Silem. I say presumed owner, I didn't hang around long enough to find out. And anyway, that place should have its name changed from Silem to Asylum, if you ask me. Webbed fingers, not enough surnames, if you get my drift. On to Murder as Announced and Powerstock in Dorset, which stood in for Chipping Cleghorn, where we had a much better reception. At Julian and Bunch Harmon's church door, we had a lovely reminiscing chat with the man who lives in what was used as the Bluebird Caff. Admittedly, I did have to clamber through a hedge or two in order to get a picture at the rear of West Compton House, as used as Miss Blacklock's little paddocks, but surely that little misdemeanor pales into insignificance compared with what went on in there. Incidentally, we met a supposed Dora Bunner lookalike once at the 2015 Christie Festival in Torquay, and just like the real bunny, she was a nuisance too. A pocket full of rye once again necessitated breaking a few rules in order to gain access to Thelverton Hall, used as Yew Tree Lodge. As this was Norfolk, and there's some funny people live there, I stayed in the car for this one. P.S. The yew bushes, garden ornaments, gates, walls, telephone box, street lights, all fake. Murder at the Vicarage, based on Agatha's experience of the very vicarage in which I'm presently sitting. now Nigel and Julia Eads' Heathcliff House B&B, of course, on the sunny English Riviera. Book now to avoid disappointment. In the adaptation, Beck House in Amport, Hampshire stood in for the vicarage. And as both Mrs. Prothero and Mrs. Cooper found out, they provided a handy side gate with which to gain access to the rear of the property. Also, Miss Marple must have terrific eyesight. Her garden is over 6 miles away from this location. Gaining access to the chemist's shop, used by the curate, Mr. Hawes, was a little easier. We actually stayed in it. It's a holiday rental called Little Trout in Joan Hickson's St. Mary Mead, Netherwallop, Hampshire, right next to Big Trout, named, I believe, in honour of these two local dignitaries. Getting close to Prothero's old hall, Houghton Lodge, Stockport, Hampshire, was a bit more difficult, as the gates were closed. But as they say, where there's a will, and after all, what are rules made for? Anyone? Anyone? Sleeping murder. Inevitably, due to demolition, redevelopment, etc., some locations from 30 plus years ago are no longer in existence. This episode is a prime example. Jackie Affleck's Daffodil Coach Garage on the Esplanade at Sidmouth on the South Devon coast is now a new private apartment building. Plus, Starcross Asylum, where Gwenda Reed goes to find out about her father's final days, is now a housing development. Ironically, Kelling Sanatorium, near the North Norfolk coast, the one that Christie describes in the book, does remain and is still in use as a nursing home. Access to Watch Hill in Budleigh Salterton, just along the coast from Sidmouth, that was used as a Gwenny's childhood home, Hillside St. Catherine's, required a bit more careful treading, as it's now used as an Airbnb. I was again fortunate to find it unoccupied, but having taken my pictures, I scurried away down the drive, only to be met by the returning incumbents. Luckily, they were aware of its previous use, and another hastily contrived pack of lies about seeking possible accommodation for a group of Christie enthusiasts saved the day. At Bertram's Hotel. Even in my totally convincing guise as Miss Marple, I couldn't get into the University Women's Club at 2 Audley Square, London, that was used for the interiors of Bertram's. And even the lovely Mrs. C, who's a fine little woman and good to the kids, couldn't convince anyone that she'd been to university. Nemesis. I managed to find the very room that Miss Temple wrote the fatal letter to Clotilde. That's room 10, the Antrobus Hotel, Amesbury, Wiltshire. The fountain in the gardens where she ponders her next move. The very bench where she takes a nap awaiting her nephew's return with an ice cream. That's Hidcote Gardens, Gloucestershire. The tea rooms in Woodstock and Cirencester used by Miss M and the Bradbury Scott sisters respectively. We even found Verity's grave at Northleys Church in Gloucestershire, where the memorial service for Miss Temple is also held. Although when Miss M and Professor Wanstead go back inside to hear from Archdeacon Brabazon, they find themselves in St. James's Church, Chipping Campden, 20 miles away. A similar thing happens when poor Miss Temple is struck on the head by a falling statue in the library of Oriel College, Oxford. Professor Wanstead comes rushing through to her aid from the dining room of Berkeley Castle in Gloucestershire, some 63 miles away. Michael Raffield's method, Berkeley Castle there again for you, Michael Raffield's method of gaining entry to Benham Park in Berkshire by slipping up the back road and hopping over the fence with his dog in order to view Raphael House seemed a reasonable idea to me, so I followed in his footsteps. However, despite extensive searching, I have been unable to find the Bradbury Scott Manor House or Abbey Juice's post office. Can you help? The 4:50 from Paddington. Apart from the fact that Mrs. McGillicuddy's train actually departs from Marylebone, not Paddington, and the old barn at Rutherford Hall, where Lucy finds a sarcophagus, is in fact the archway to the stable block at Orchardley House in Somerset, as a locations detective, I was particularly pleased to find the actual spot where the body was thrown from the train. It's on the Severn Valley Railway at the Devil's Spittleful Nature Reserve in Worcestershire, some 105 miles away from where Lucy commenced her golf practice. Watch out, Tiger Woods. By the way, for the Elizabeth Club for Ladies, where Miss M meets up with Lucy to discuss the assignment, there's the Devil's Spittleful for you. It means devil's spoonful, by the way, or spadeful. We're back to Bertram's, the University Women's Club. A Caribbean mystery. I have never been to the Caribbean. Torquay is quite exotic enough for me, thank you very much. On the sunny English Riviera. Book now to ensure disappointment. Avoid disappointment. Unless, of course, you've been to an Agatha Christie festival, then you'll understand. However, I do know it was filmed at the Coral Reef Club in Barbados, and that Agatha is rumoured to have stayed in the very bungalow occupied by Jason Raphael whilst writing it. They do it with mirrors. Miss Marple meets Carrie Louise's sister Ruth at the Savoy Hotel in London, where, with rooms for £500 a night upwards, we're frequent visitors to the nearby travel lodge. While I have yet to gain access to the Victorian lavatory period edifice that stood in for Stonygates, Heath House in Staffordshire, we found the staff at Bewdley Railway Station in Worcestershire, where, as in the 450, Miss Marple's train comes in, most accommodating. The mirror cracked. Another example of some places no longer being there. The old Plaza Cinema in Amesbury, Wiltshire, supposedly showing Marina Gregg's latest film that Inch drives Dolly past, is now a medical centre. They were on their way back to St Mary Mead from Bishop's Lydyard Station in Somerset, where they were good enough to run a steam engine under the road bridge just so we could match our picture up. When they arrive at the lodge to Gossington Hall, actually the lodge to Amport House, Hampshire, they, like the present occupants of the lodge, are a little alarmed to find a hairy-faced Dolly impersonator outside. They've made a few changes to Gossington since Arthur's day. They've changed the doors, the windows, the brickwork, the shape, and even the location to Summerley, Ringwood, Hampshire. We found the development, Aylward's Way, Netherwallop, where Miss Marple breaks the heel of her shoe due to that wretched Cooper fellow, whilst walking the dog when Mrs. C, perhaps employing some of Ariadne Oliver's famous female intuition, says, "I think it's up here." "Oh, I wouldn't have thought so," replied the all-knowing one, me, just as Heather Badcock's bungalow came into view. There we met Margaret, who lives opposite in the bungalow that Giuseppe the butler is seen walking past. She remembered the filming very well, as she apparently upset the film crew and Joan Hickson in particular by mowing her front lawn when they were trying to film. Our heroine is reported to have remonstrated that she was too old for all these interruptions. Personally, I felt a certain connection to Margaret, a fellow nonconformist, if somewhat cantankerous spirit, rebelling against the system. Right on, sister. Or should that be grandmother? Tootsie bye. And so, onto a brief section or selection of David Suchet's Poirot location adventures, starting with Peril at End House. Although there was a locked gate at the pedestrian entrance to the Malt at South Sands in Devon, which doubled as End House, I managed to get a couple of sneaky snaps. I was not, however, quite so fortunate in gaining access to Poirot's majestic hotel, which is now private apartments, or the Grange Nursing Home, which is now Salcombe Yacht Club. The keen observer may notice that the view of End House, the Malt, over the shoulder of Poirot and Hastings when they are sitting near the swimming pools of the Majestic in Salcombe, can only be seen from Bolt Head in South Sands on the road up to the National Trust Overbecks, some 2 miles down the coast. Indeed, throughout their conversation with Maggie Buckley and Commander Challenger, the somewhat shaky background repeatedly changes from one to the other. It is said that Agatha based End House on Rock End House near the Imperial Hotel in her birthplace of Torquay. Only one piece remains of that structure on Rock End Walk overlooking Tor Bay. The mysterious affair at Styles. We were met with locked and chained gates at Shavenage House in Tetbury, Gloucestershire, which stood in for Styles Court, so getting pictures of the back lawn required a little bit of ingenuity. And as Styles St Mary Post Office is actually a private house, I didn't think I'd better ask for stamps there. Likewise, at the pub in the Wiltshire village of Easton Grey that Poirot's fellow Belgian refugees frequent, and at Poirot's abode at Leastways Cottage, the reception was somewhat muted. Finding the train station where Hastings arrived was considerably easier, as it's used in a number of TV and film adaptations and is still in use on the Bluebell Heritage Railway at Horsted Keynes. Ooh, go too quick. Turning my page over. In Sussex. The murder of Roger Ackroyd. The picturesque Castle Combe in Wiltshire stood in for King's Abbot, where the police station and general store may be fake, but thankfully the White Hart pub next to Poirot's house isn't. Poor Mrs. C was quite distraught when I drove the old jalopy past the private no entry signs at Benham's Lane in Forley, Oxfordshire, just to get a snapshot of Kit's Close that was used as Ackroyd's Fernley Park. But as I explained to her, I do it all for you, dear location fans. And anyway, she's lucky I didn't make her venture into the infernal abyss that is the engine house at Kempton Park Water Treatment Works that was used at Ackroyd's factory. Evil under the sun. Perhaps ours and many others' favourite location, the Art Deco splendour that is Burr Island. We stayed in the Christie room and Poirot's own room with a view, the Cunard, which according to a reputable member of staff was the only inside area that the hotel allowed to be filmed. The rest was done in a studio. This is the reputable member of staff. Apparently, the management were concerned for their guests' privacy, as it seems Burr Island still lives up to its hedonistic reputation gained in the 20s and 30s. Ooh la la. Thankfully, exterior filming wasn't such a problem, and we even managed to find the mysterious Pixie Cave on nearby Thurleston Sands. Oh, there she is in it. Oh, he's discovered the body on the beach. The woman in the foreground looks shocked. And of course, that's what happens in the cave, in case you didn't know. For the trip to the mainland library, and for ex-Reverend Stephen Lane's medicinal needs, we return once again to Peril at End House's Salcombe. While Evil Under the Sun, oh, there he is getting his medicinal needs. That's a clothing shop. While Evil Under the Sun starts in the Oxfordshire village of Hambledon, there it is starting, and there it is, they used it as a railway station. Mrs. McGinty's dead mostly remains there. Note, there's Mrs. McGinty's dead starting. Note the post office is actually a butcher's shop, as the real post office was used as a post office in Sad Cyprus. Yet another locked gate at Harpston Court near Henley-on-Thames in Oxfordshire, which was used as the Summerhays Long Meadows. And this time Mrs. C put her foot down with a firm hand when I suggested creeping through the church graveyard next door to get a better view. Poirot nearly gets pushed under a train at Horsted Keynes railway station. And when the actual same train came in when we were there it is coming in, Mrs. C kindly offered to do the same thing for me. Just for an accurate comparison, she said. At Mrs. McGinty's house, Colestroke Farm, Hambledon, we met the owner, Mrs. Keane, who remembered the other Poirot coming to her house with film crew in tow. Apparently, she had to keep out of the way, but was paid handsomely for it. In The Mystery of the Blue Train, and again in Murder on the Orient Express, you'd be forgiven for thinking that Poirot's luxurious Pullman train was departing from somewhere warm and exotic, like the south of France or Istanbul. I'm afraid the reality is somewhat more mundane. In both cases, it's actually Wansford, on the Nene Valley Railway, just off the A1 near Peterborough. Yeah, there's Lindsay Duncan, Lady Tamplin, and Gary Cooper, retired Duntamperin. Shut up now. They've still got the original blue train by the looks of it, and if you look closely, it looks like they were getting ready to film another Poirot. But at least they eventually got to the Côte d'Azur in the blue train, whereas the Orient Express used Malta for Turkey, the Freemasons' Hall in London for the Tocatlian Hotel and station gates. There they are. The same gates that were used, incidentally, in the blue train, where Poirot interviews suspects arriving at the supposed Gare de Nice, actually Menton Art Museum, and for the freezing conditions of a mid-European snowdrift catastrophe, they chose Black Park in Buckinghamshire, in England, in June. Both Sad Cypress and Cat Among the Pigeons used the Surrey Hospice Joyce Grove at Nettlebed in Oxfordshire for Hunterbury House and Meadowbank School, respectively, where they were kind enough, after initially being a little startled at a strange man turning up dressed as Poirot, to let me take my pictures. But when they started handing round the fish paste sandwiches, I bid a hasty retreat. Just down the road from Jane Austen's house in Hampshire is Rotherfield Park, which was used as the Abernethy's Enderby in After the Funeral. There is a public footpath across the park, but when I inevitably strayed ever so slightly from the path to get a better picture of the entrance, I was rebuffed by the now familiar "Get off my land" by the owner. A knight of the realm, no less. Oh yes, I've been ejected by some top people, you know. On to Elephants Can Remember. Although they say by the time Agatha wrote that, she couldn't. Anyway, none of those problems at Gray's Court near Henley-on-Thames, where Ariadne goes to visit the Honourable Julia Carstairs, or the dishonourable Bess Sedgwick to you and me, and again at the Dower House, although Nanny Matcham wasn't in when we called either. Oh, by the way, Celia Ravenscroft's family home is not, as I would have us believe, on the edge of the Seven Sisters Cliffs on the south coast of England. It's on Longcross Film Studios in Surrey. So she wouldn't have had too far to fall when being pushed off the balcony. And anyway, I'll bet they put down a padded mat. Bunch of softies, these film types, not like us intrepid locations detectives. It's another case of it's not where you think it is in the Big Four. Jonathan Wally, the collector of Chinese artifacts, dies not at Little Missenden Manor in Hertfordshire, where they wouldn't let me or the journalist Tyso pass the gates, but just up the road at Hewenden Manor, where the prime suspect is released not from a grim prison, but from the very charming National Trust Stable Yard Cafe that lies within. The National Trust also provided a place where the Big Four's Stephen Painter meets his grisly end. It's Nuffield Place in Oxfordshire, former home of Lord Nuffield, Sir William Morris, founder of the Morris Motor Company, where they still keep his model of Dolly Bantry's car, the first Morris Minor ever produced. And as I had dressed for the occasion, they even let me have a go on the antique snooker table. I say let me, they weren't actually aware, and as there were no cameras in there, apart from mine, please don't tell them, I might want to go back. The Labours of Hercules, perhaps a difficult one to put on screen, as indeed the scant regard that the adaptation paid to the book seemed to confirm. So I'll just tell you that the Swiss mountaintop hotel that was supposedly cut off, oh, I've gone too far. I can put it in, I beg your pardon, forget that. Dead Man's Folly. Oh, there it is, I beg your pardon, there it is. The hotel at the Swiss mountaintop hotel that was supposedly cut off by an avalanche is in fact very much at ground level in Buckinghamshire, England. It's actually the officers' mess at RAF Halton. So it's chocks away, chaps, and on to Dead Man's Folly. Back to for that one. There he is. Filmed jointly at High Cannons in Borehamwood in Hertfordshire and the loveliest place on earth, Agatha Christie's own home, Greenway in Devon, where in 2017, I was asked by the National Trust owners of Greenway to open their Dead Man's Folly 1950s garden fete as part of the International Agatha Christie Festival, dressed, of course, as Poirot. I was happy to oblige. They even filmed a skit where I win a Kewpie doll on the hoopla, like Poirot does, and hand it over to a passing child, just as Suchet does in the adaptation. We've always had such a good reception to our schlepping around in costume at Greenway in particular. There we are, schlepping around. It made a nice change to actually be welcome in a place. So next year, we stayed there with a few friends and we had a whale of a time, having the entire place to ourselves. Yes, we even played tennis. And the final curtain. If you wish to get past the big, heavy, normally locked gates at the entrance to Sherburn Castle in Oxfordshire, which was used as the stiles in the final episode, in order to get a sneaky picture round the back, simply inquire about access to the church, and the smaller gates to the left will be opened for you. I was told absolutely no photos, which is a bit like saying, do not press this button. Just makes you want to do it even more, doesn't it? In any case, the old place was a bit run down, which probably made it perfect for the atmosphere of the final chapter. So that's it. Like Suchet, I've since hung up my Homburg for good, but they were good days. Yes, they have been good days. Thank you.